The town that remembered me. Part I, the return. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not the sterile, recycled air of airplanes, nor the faint plastic scent of the rental car I'd driven from the airport. No. As I crossed the faded welcome sign into my hometown, I rolled down the window and it hit me. The damp earth after last night's rain, mixed with the faint sweetness of blooming lilacs that clung stubbornly along the old railroad tracks. 30 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen this place. And yet, it was as though the town had been waiting for me. The cracked road twisted through the familiar hills, the same ones I'd biked down recklessly as a boy. My heart beat strangely fast, as though I were about to meet someone important. My palms felt damp on the steering wheel. I had told myself I was coming here to close a chapter, to finally face the ghost of a memory that had haunted me since childhood. But the truth was simpler. I was running out of places to run. My life in the city had unraveled. A failed marriage, a job that had worn me down to a shell, and an emptiness that gnawed no matter how much noise I surrounded myself with. So here I was, back to the beginning. The town was smaller than I remembered. Time does that. Streets stretch endlessly when you're young, but shrink when you return as an adult. I slowed as I drove past shuttered shops, their signs sun-bleached and peeling. The old movie theater, where I'd watched my first film with sweaty palms and a racing heart, stood dark, its marquee letters missing, leaving only rusted slots like broken teeth. But not everything was gone. The bakery still stood, its bricks faded but the windows glowing with warm light. A woman stepped out carrying a paper bag, and the smell of fresh bread drifted into the air. My chest tightened. That bakery had once been my entire world on Saturday mornings. It was strange. Everything had changed, and yet everything remained. I parked by the town square. The fountain in the center still sputtered unevenly, just as it had when I was a boy dropping coins in and making impossible wishes. And then I noticed it. Eyes. People were staring. At first I thought I was imagining it, but as I stepped out of the car and stretched, I felt their gazes linger. A man across the street paused with his dog mid-stride. An elderly woman froze in the act of locking her bicycle. And then came the whispers. That's him, isn't it? After all these years. I can't believe he came back. A chill spread through me. I hadn't spoken to anyone here in 3 decades. No phone calls, no letters, nothing. How could they possibly remember me? I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and walked toward the diner at the corner. I told myself it was hunger pulling me there, but really it was curiosity. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and I was hit with the aroma of frying bacon, coffee, and something fried in butter. I paused, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light. Every head turned. For a moment, no one spoke. Then a voice broke the silence. Well, I'll be damned. Look who it is. I turned. Behind the counter stood a man with silver in his hair and lines etched deep into his face. His name came back to me slowly, like a half-remembered tune. Eddie, I said softly. His lips parted in a grin. You remember. He wiped his hands on a rag and came around the counter. His gait was slower now, but his hug was just as fierce as it had been when we were kids. The diner erupted with murmurs. Someone clapped. Someone else whispered, "It really is him." My confusion deepened. Eddie, what's going on? Why are people looking at me like that? He pulled back, his grin fatting into something more serious. You really don't know, do you? I shook my head. Eddie gestured for me to sit, his hand trembling slightly. Sit down, my friend. We've been waiting 30 years to tell you. Part I, echoes of the past. The coffee was bitter, just as I remembered. The cracked vinyl of the booth dug into my side. For a moment, I felt like a boy again, hiding here with Eddie after school, dreaming of futures bigger than this town. But the way everyone kept glancing at me stole any comfort. They looked at me not like an old friend returned, but like something else. Eddie leaned forward, his voice dropped. Do you remember the river, the summer of '95? I froze. The river. Yes, I remembered. Or at least fragments. The smell of mud, the shimmer of sunlight on water, the laughter of children. And then something else. A blur. A moment that had split my childhood into before and after. But I had buried it so deep, convinced myself it wasn't important. Eddie's eyes searched mine. You saved a life that day. The diner fell quiet, as though everyone was leaning in, waiting. I frowned. No, no, Eddie, you must be mistaken. I was just a kid. He shook his head. A kid who jumped into that river when no one else did. A kid who pulled Tommy Harris out before the current dragged him under for good. People never forgot. The name hit me like a stone. Tommy Harris. A boy younger than us, quiet, with hair that always stuck out in wild tufts. I hadn't thought about him in years. Tommy, I whispered. The memory sharpened painfully. The way he had slipped, the panic in his eyes, my own body plunging into the freezing current, arms flailing, lungs burning, the world spinning. And then hands, my hands pulling him up, my arms shaking as we collapsed on the bank, coughing, shivering. And then nothing. My memory had cut off there, like a film reel burning out. Eddie's voice softened. Tommy's alive today because of you. And this town never forgot. You left, but the story stayed. I stared at him, struggling to process it. But no one ever told me. My parents. They didn't know, Eddie interrupted gently. You never told anyone, but Tommy did. He told everyone who would listen. He said you were the reason he grew up, the reason he became who he is. You were his hero. A lump formed in my throat. My hands trembled around the coffee cup. 30 years. And all this time, I had been running from ghosts, not knowing that one of them was gratitude. But something didn't add up. Eddie, I said slowly, if that's true, then why do I feel like there's more to this? Why does everyone look at me like I'm more than just a childhood memory? Eddie's eyes darkened. He leaned back, sighing heavily. Because, my friend, that day didn't end the way you think it did. There's more to the story, much more. Part Cyrillic letter 456 II, the shadow beneath the water. The diner hummed faintly with the sound of forks against plates and the hiss of coffee being refilled. But to me, it felt as though the whole place was holding its breath. Eddie leaned back, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name. That day by the river, people tell it as a story of bravery, but not everyone remembers it the same way. My chest tightened. What do you mean? He looked away, out the window, where rain had begun to dot the glass. Some folks believe you didn't just pull Tommy out. They believe you went back in for someone else. I blinked, the words rattled in my head, not making sense. Someone else. Eddie nodded slowly. There was another boy, Mark Callahan. Do you remember him? The name lit a dim spark of memory. A tall kid, older than us, always quick with a cruel laugh. He'd been the one daring everyone to go further into the river that summer. I searched my mind, but the memory splintered. Water, shouting, fear, and then blankness. I don't remember. That's the thing, Eddie said. Mark didn't come back, they never found him. The words hit me like a fist. Mark gone. A hollow ringing filled my ears, drowning out the clatter of the diner. My stomach churned, and suddenly I was back there, waist deep in icy current, hearing voices screaming on the shore. I remembered Tommy's terrified face. I remembered the surge of strength that had pushed me forward. And then something else. A tug, a shadow in the water, my hand reaching out. I shuddered. The memory dissolved before it could fully form. My voice broke. I didn't know. Eddie's expression was unreadable. You were just a kid. Nobody blamed you. You saved one life when others froze, but for Mark's family, he trailed off, sighing. For a moment, silence stretched between us. My pulse thudded in my ears. A life saved, a life lost, both tied to me. Is that why people look at me like that? I whispered. Partly, Eddie admitted. To some, you're the boy who saved Tommy Harris. To others, you're the boy who couldn't save Mark Callahan. And for 30 years, that story's been living here, growing like ivy, wrapping itself around everything. I left the diner in a daze, the bell above the door jangling behind me. The town's square blurred as I walked, the fountain's sputter sounding like a mocking laugh. The air outside was damp, thick with the smell of wet asphalt. I pressed a hand to my forehead. Fragments of memory kept flashing. Mark's laughter daring us into the water, Tommy slipping, my body plunging in, the cold biting so hard it burned. And then a shape beside me, a hand slipping from mine. Had I tried to grab him? Had I let go? The question hollowed me out. I wandered the streets aimlessly, drawn by instinct rather than direction. My feet carried me past the old school, its playground rusted and abandoned. Past the church, its bell tower leaning like a weary sentinel. And then I found myself at the edge of the river. The sight of it hit me like a blow. The same wide current, brown and restless, cutting through the landscape. The trees along its banks had grown taller, but the smell, the raw, earthy tang of water and mud, was the same. I stood frozen, listening to the rush of the current, and felt myself dragged backward in time. Flashback. It was hot that day, the kind of heat that glued shirts to skin. The river shimmered under the afternoon sun, daring us closer. Mark stood with his fists on his hips, his voice sharp. "What, are you all scared? It's just water, don't be bobbies." Tommy hesitated on the bank, toes curled into the dirt. His voice cracked. "It looks deep." Mark sneered. "Then don't come in, stay with the little kids." I had felt something then, anger maybe or pride. Without thinking, I had jumped. The water swallowed me whole, cold and wild. My friends cheered. But then Tommy slipped. His cry split the air. I turned, saw him flailing, disappearing beneath the surface. I swam, arms burning, legs kicking. My hand closed around his, pulling, dragging. My lungs screamed, but I didn't let go. We broke the surface, gasping. I shoved him toward the bank. Kids pulled him up, coughing, crying. Relief flooded me. And then Mark's voice, a shout, desperate. The current pulled harder. I turned. He was further out, his face pale, his arms thrashing. I swam toward him. Yes, I remembered now. The current tearing at me, dragging me down. My fingers brushed his wrist. I almost had him. And then something. A surge, a wave, his hand slipping free. His eyes, wide, terrified, disappearing beneath the water. I had screamed, but the river had swallowed the sound. The flashback shattered. I collapsed to my knees on the bank, chest heaving. I remembered now. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know Eddie was right. I had saved one boy, but I had failed another. Beautiful, isn't it? The voice startled me. I looked up. A man stood a few feet away, tall, broad-shouldered, with flecks of gray in his beard. His eyes were steady, piercing, and strangely familiar. He extended a hand. "Tommy Harris." My breath caught. Time had carved new lines into his face, but beneath them was the same boy I had dragged from the river 30 years ago. I took his hand numbly. "Tommy, you saved me," he said softly. "I've been waiting for this day a long time." We sat by the river as the afternoon deepened into gold. Tommy's voice carried both gratitude and weight. "You disappeared," he said. "One day you were gone, no goodbye, no explanation, just gone." "My family moved," I muttered. "My father got a job in the city, and I guess I never looked back." Tommy studied me. "But you never forgot." I shook my head. "I tried, God, I tried, but the river, it never left me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You need to know something. That day didn't just change my life. It shaped the whole town. Mark's death, my survival, it became a story everyone told. Some called it tragedy, some called it fate, but no one forgot your name." I swallowed hard. "And you, what did you call it?" His eyes glistened. "I called it the day I was given a second chance, and I swore I wouldn't waste it." His words should have comforted me, but instead, guilt pressed harder. "You don't understand," I said hoarsely. "I tried to save Mark, I almost had him, but I let go, I let go." Tommy's gaze softened. "You were 13, a boy. You gave everything you had. That's not failure, that's courage." But the knot in my chest refused to loosen. Because deep down, a darker thought whispered, what if I could have held on? What if I didn't try hard enough? And then Tommy said something that made my blood run cold. Mark's family never believed it was an accident. There it was, the first crack in the story. I turned to him sharply. What? He nodded grimly. For years, they said someone pushed him, that it wasn't the river that took him, that it was deliberate. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. Deliberate. Tommy's expression darkened, and some people think they know who. Part Ivy, whispers in the dark. The wind picked up along the riverbank, carrying the smell of wet earth and something metallic, like rust. Tommy's words hung between us, heavy as stones. Deliberate, I repeated, my voice a rasp. You mean murder. Tommy didn't flinch. That's what Mark's family believed. They said he was too strong a swimmer, too confident in the water. They couldn't accept that the river took him, so they looked for someone to blame. I stared at him, my skin prickling. And they blamed me. He nodded slowly. They never said it outright, not in front of you. But after you left, the whispers started. That maybe you and Mark fought, that maybe you wanted to prove something, that maybe you didn't let him drown, you helped him. The world tilted. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. That's insane, I spat. I was a child, I tried to save him, you saw me. Tommy held up a hand. I believe you, I always have, but others, he trailed off, shaking his head. Others weren't so forgiving. The air thickened with the weight of 30 years. I pressed my palms into my knees, trying to ground myself. All this time, I whispered, I thought I was running from a memory, but I was running from a reputation. Tommy's eyes softened. Yes, half this town remembers you as the boy who saved me. The other half remembers you as the boy who killed Mark Callahan. The words struck like a verdict. No wonder the stares in the diner. No wonder the silence when I walked in. To them, I wasn't just a ghost from the past. I was a story unresolved. We left the river as dusk settled, the water turning from bronze to black. Tommy walked me back toward town, our footsteps crunching against gravel. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. He exhaled heavily. Because Mark's family is still here. His sister, Anna, she never left, and she's never stopped asking questions. If you're going to stay, you'll have to face her. The name hit me like a blade. Anna. I remembered her. A girl with fiery hair and sharper words, a shadow at Mark's side. She had been 15 when he died, which meant she'd carried her grief into adulthood, carved by suspicion. I stopped walking. Does she know I'm back? Tommy's silence was answer enough. The town had changed under the cover of night. Street lamps flickered weakly, casting orange halos on cracked sidewalks. The square, once alive with children's laughter and evening chatter, stood deserted, the fountain sputtering in the quiet. I should have gone back to my motel. I should have locked the door and drowned my thoughts in sleep. But instead, my feet carried me past the library, past the bakery, toward the Callahan house. It stood at the edge of town, its roof sagging, its paint peeling in strips. Weeds clawed at the porch. A single light glowed in the window. My chest tightened. I hadn't set foot near this house since I was 13. I forced myself up the steps, each creak like an accusation. I lifted my hand to knock. The door opened before I touched it. Anna Callahan filled the doorway. Time had reshaped her, but the fire in her eyes was the same. Her hair, now streaked with silver, tumbled around a face etched with grief and steel. She looked at me without surprise, almost as if she'd been expecting me. So, she said, her voice low and steady, the prodigal son returns. My mouth went dry. Anna. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut. Do you know how many nights I've dreamed of this moment? You, standing here 30 years too late. I swallowed hard. I didn't. She raised a hand, silencing me. I don't want excuses, I want answers. She stepped aside, and against every instinct I entered. The house smelled of dust and old wood, with a faint undercurrent of mildew. Photos lined the mantel, family portraits frozen in time. Mark's face stared back at me from a dozen frames, eternally 13, forever the boy he had been on the riverbank. Anna followed my gaze, He never aged, not in here, not in here. She tapped her temple. And not in here. She pressed a hand to her chest. I felt my throat constrict. I tried to save him, I whispered. God knows I tried. Her eyes locked onto mine. And yet you didn't. The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. We sat at a scarred wooden table, the light above buzzing faintly. Anna poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one toward me. Her hand shook ever so slightly. For 30 years, she said, staring into her glass, I've heard 2 stories. One paints you as a hero, the other as a killer. And the truth died with my brother. I gripped the glass but didn't drink. Anna, I swear. Her eyes snapped up, blazing. Swear all you want, but tell me this, why did you leave? Why didn't you stay and face what happened? The question pierced me. I had no good answer. My father's job had been the excuse, but the truth was simpler, darker. I had been afraid. Afraid of the whispers, afraid of the memory, afraid of myself. I was a coward, I admitted. That's why. Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then, unexpectedly, her voice softened. You were children, all of you, but the river took one and left the rest to carry it. That's what no one tells you about grief. It doesn't just belong to the family. It seeps into the whole town, and it poisoned this place. I stared at her, surprised. So you don't believe I hurt him? Her expression flickered. I don't know what I believe anymore. I've carried anger for so long it's become part of me. But the way you're sitting here now, she trailed off, eyes glistening. Maybe you're not the villain I painted you to be. Relief warred with guilt inside me. But before I could respond, she leaned closer, her voice dropping. There's something else you don't know. My pulse quickened. What? Her eyes darkened. Mark wasn't supposed to be at the river that day. He had promised me he'd stay home. But someone convinced him to go, someone who wanted him there. I frowned. Who? Anna's gaze was piercing. That's what I've been trying to find out for 30 years. Her words cracked the story wide open. All this time, I thought the river had been an accident. But what if it was? What if someone had led Mark there, knowing what could happen? The memory of his taunts, his daring, his reckless grin replayed in my mind. But behind it, another question rose like a shadow. Who pushed him to that river? Anna's voice was almost a whisper. You came back at the right time, because I've recently learned something that changes everything. I leaned forward, heart hammering. Tell me. Her eyes narrowed. Not tonight, tomorrow. Meet me here at dawn. I'll show you. I left her house shaken, my mind a storm of guilt, fear, and questions. The streets were empty, the town asleep, but I felt eyes on me, watching from every shadow. Back in the motel, I lay awake, replaying every detail of the past and every word Anna had said. Hero, killer, witness, suspect, which one was I? As sleep finally dragged me under, a single thought burned in my mind. If someone had wanted Mark at that river, then his death wasn't just an accident. It was something far darker. Part V, the clue. The dawn came gray and cold, the kind of morning where the mist clings low over the ground, swallowing fences and trees in its pale veil. I barely slept, turning over Anna's words until they cut grooves into my mind. Mark wasn't supposed to be at the river. Someone wanted him there. That thought chased me through the night, and now, bleary-eyed, I walked back toward the Callahan house. Anna was waiting on the porch, a mug of coffee in her hands, steam curling into the damp air. She looked tired, older somehow than she had the night before, but her eyes burned with a fierce clarity. You came, she said simply. I had to, I replied. She gestured for me to follow. Then it's time you knew the truth. Inside, she led me to a back room I didn't remember. Dust coated the shelves, and boxes lined the walls, each labeled with careful handwriting. This is where I keep him alive, she said quietly. Every letter, every photograph, every rumor. 30 years of collecting pieces of a puzzle no one else wanted to solve. She set a box on the table, pulling the lid off. Inside were yellowed newspapers, faded photographs, brittle notebooks. My hands trembled as I reached for the top clipping. Local boy lost 2 river, body never recovered. Beneath the headline was Mark's school portrait, smiling awkwardly, forever 13. I forced myself to read, the words blurring as the article described the tragic accident, the brave rescue of Tommy, the unanswered questions about why Mark had ventured so far into the current. Anna spoke softly. The official story was simple, a boy drowned, but rumors said otherwise, and I chased them all. She reached deeper into the box and pulled out a folded piece of paper, its edges frayed. She handed it to me. "Read this." I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but familiar in a way that made my chest tighten. It was Mark's. "Meet me by the river after school. Don't tell anyone. I need to show you something." My breath caught. Who is this written to? Anna's eyes locked on mine. That's what I've never been able to prove, but I found it in his room the day after he vanished, stuffed in his jacket pocket. He was supposed to deliver it, but never did. The words blurred as I stared at the note. A secret meeting, a reason for him to be there that day. And then a darker realization struck. If he never delivered it, then maybe the person he meant to meet came anyway. Anna nodded grimly. "Exactly. And if that's true, then you weren't the last one to see my brother alive." The room seemed to tilt. For 30 years, I had carried the weight of being the last witness, the one who couldn't hold on. But now, that story cracked open. Someone else had been there. Someone else had seen him. I swallowed hard. "Do you have any idea who it was meant for?" Anna's gaze flickered. There were names whispered. A few boys he ran with sometimes, troublemakers, but one name came up more than once. She hesitated. "Eddie." The word hit me like a thunderclap. "Eddie," I repeated. "My Eddie, the one who hugged me like a brother yesterday." Anna's expression hardened. "The same. He was always close to Mark, closer than people realized. I think Mark trusted him, maybe too much." I shook my head. "Number Eddie was with me at the diner that day." "Was he?" Anna's tone was sharp. "Or do you only remember it that way because you wanted to?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. The truth was, the memory of that day was fractured. Faces blurred, voices overlapped, time smeared like wet paint. Anna's voice softened. "I don't say this lightly. Eddie lost something that day too, his best friend. But what if he knew more than he ever admitted? What if he's been keeping secrets all this time?" The thought made my skin crawl. I thought of Eddie's hug at the diner, his easy smile, the way his voice had softened when he told me. "We've been waiting 30 years to tell you." We? Who was we? And why did his eyes darken when I asked about the past? I felt a tremor run through me. If Eddie knew, why wouldn't he say something? Anna's lips pressed into a thin line. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, or maybe protection. Some truths are dangerous. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her revelation sinking in. The note still trembled in my hands, its words pulling me back across 3 decades. "Meet me by the river after school. Don't tell anyone." Who had Mark wanted to meet, and what had he needed to show? My thoughts spun with possibilities, each darker than the last. Finally, Anna's voice broke the silence. "I asked you here not to accuse you, but to prepare you. If you're staying in this town, you'll have to decide whether to keep carrying their version of the story or to dig for the truth." Her eyes burned into me. "But if you dig, you may not like what you find." I left her house shaken to the core. The sun had finally broken through the mist, casting long shadows across the cracked sidewalks. But the warmth did nothing to ease the chill inside me. For 30 years, I had believed the story was simple. One boy saved, one boy lost. I had been both hero and failure. But now I knew the truth was messier. Someone else had been part of it, someone who had never spoken. And the name on Anna's lips was Eddie. I walked back to the square, my thoughts racing. The diner's neon sign flickered in the distance, its windows glowing warmly against the morning chill. Through the glass, I saw Eddie behind the counter, laughing with a customer. He looked older, heavier, but the same boyish spark lingered in his eyes. Could it be true? Could my oldest friend be hiding something this whole time? I pushed open the door. The bell jingled. Eddie looked up, his grin wide. Back again already. Can't stay away from my coffee, huh? I forced a smile, but inside, suspicion gnawed. Eddie, I said slowly, we need to talk. He blinked, then nodded, sensing my tone. Sure thing, let's go out back. We stepped into the alley behind the diner, the morning air sharper here, carrying the scent of frying oil and damp brick. I turned to him, my heart pounding. Eddie, were you with Mark that day? His smile faltered. And for the first time since I'd returned, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not confusion, not hurt, but fear. The days following that night felt strangely quiet. The chaos of the storm was gone, replaced by a lingering stillness that weighed heavily on Daniel's heart. He would walk through the streets of his neighborhood, the sound of his boots crunching against broken branches and scattered debris, and he would feel a strange mix of sadness and awe. The world looked scarred. Roofs had caved in. Old oak trees, ones that had stood for decades, were snapped in half, their roots clawing helplessly at the sky. But amid the destruction, Daniel noticed something else. People working together. Neighbors he barely knew were out on the streets, clearing pathways, helping families carry soaked belongings out of their ruined homes. For the first time in years, the community wasn't separated by fences or locked behind doors. They were one. Daniel stood by his mother as they helped Mrs. Thompson, their elderly neighbor, clear the waterlogged furniture from her living room. Every move Daniel made carried a dull ache in his muscles from the night before, but he didn't complain. He didn't want to. There was something almost healing in this shared struggle. Later that evening, Daniel sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set behind the damaged skyline. His mother joined him, placing a warm hand on his shoulder. You did good, Daniel, she said softly. Her words carried more weight than he could bear. For a moment, his throat tightened, and all the emotions he had held back during the chaos came rushing in, the fear of losing her, the terror in his sister's cries, the relief when it was finally over. I was so scared, he whispered, his voice trembling. I thought I was going to lose you. His mother pulled him close, hugging him tightly. And yet, you didn't run. You stood your ground. That's what courage really is, not the absence of fear, but pushing forward despite it. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. He had stepped into a role he never thought he was ready for. He had faced the storm not just with his hands, but with his heart. And in doing so, he had changed. Reflection. The storm had taken many things: homes, possessions, memories carved into the walls of destroyed houses. But it had also given something back. It had shown Daniel who he truly was. Not just a boy. Not just a son or a brother. But a protector, a leader, someone who could carry the weight when the world demanded it. And though the scars of that night would never fully fade, Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would never look at himself the same way again. The weeks rolled into months, and the weight on Daniel's shoulders grew unbearable. Every day felt like a tug-of-war between two lives, the one he wanted and the one he was trapped in. His boss's demands escalated. What once were harmless, small adjustments turned into blatant fraud. Documents disappeared. Numbers shifted. Lives, unseen but very real, were hurt by his compliance. Daniel felt the guilt claw at him, but fear kept him silent. Fear of losing his job. Fear of losing everything he had built since the accident. At night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His wife slept beside him, breathing softly, while his mind replayed every compromise, every lie. He started keeping a hidden notebook, his own confessions, a record of every detail he was forced to change, every file he was ordered to destroy. It was dangerous, but it was the only thing keeping him sane. Then came the breaking point. One late evening, the boss summoned him to the office. A new contract was on the table, one tied to a major hospital supplier. The falsified reports meant critical shortages of medicine would go unnoticed. People could die. Sign it, the boss said, sliding the papers across the polished desk. His tone was calm, but his eyes held that same shadowy threat. Daniel's hands trembled as he held the pen. His heart pounded in his ears. Every instinct screamed, "Don't do it." But the memory of his wife's worried smile, the bills stacked on the kitchen counter, the debt that never seemed to shrink, all of it pressed against his chest. For a moment, he froze. Then, instead of signing, he closed the notebook he carried in his bag, pushed the contract back, and whispered, "I can't." The silence that followed was suffocating. His boss leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing, calculating. "You've made a mistake, Daniel." And in that instant, Daniel knew. His life was no longer his own. Part 6. The Consequences. The silence in the office stretched unbearably. Daniel could feel the weight of his boss's gaze boring into him, a pressure that threatened to crush every rational thought. He had made a choice, one that might cost him everything, but for the first time in years, he felt alive. "You've made a mistake, Daniel," the boss repeated, his voice low, dangerous. "And mistakes have consequences." Daniel's throat tightened. He swallowed hard, his fingers curling around the edge of the desk. "I understand." The next day, whispers followed him like a shadow. Emails went unanswered, meetings were postponed indefinitely, and coworkers who had once been friendly now avoided his gaze. The subtle isolation was deliberate, a calculated warning. But Daniel didn't flinch. Every morning, he reminded himself why he had refused to sign the falsified reports. People's lives were at stake, and no paycheck, no promotion, no security could justify lying to them. The pressure mounts. One evening, as he walked home through the dimly lit streets, Daniel felt eyes on him. Shadows shifted in the corners of his vision, and the faintest sound of footsteps mirrored his own. Panic clawed at him, but he pressed on, choosing not to look back. At home, the tension followed. His wife noticed it immediately. "Daniel, you're quieter than usual. Something's wrong." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "Just work stress, nothing you need to worry about." But the truth weighed him down. The boss was not one to forget or forgive. The refusal had crossed a line, and Daniel knew retaliation was inevitable. Unexpected allies. It was during one of these tense evenings that he received the first sign he wasn't alone. A simple note slid under his door, the handwriting jagged but familiar. "Meet me at the park at midnight. Trust me." Daniel's heart raced. He knew exactly who it was. It had to be his old friend, the one who had once helped him see the small acts of courage in life, who had reminded him that even in darkness, light existed. At the park, the shadows of the swings swayed in the moonlight. His friend emerged from behind the trees, a flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the fog. "You've been careful," the friend said. "But they're watching. You can't stay in your apartment anymore. Not if you want to fight back." Daniel swallowed hard. "Fight back how? I don't have proof." The friend shook their head. "You have more than you think. That notebook you've kept, your confessions, the records of what they've made you do, everything is evidence. And together, we can make sure it matters." Building the case. Over the next several nights, they worked in secrecy. Daniel pored over his hidden notebook, verifying every detail, comparing dates, double-checking files. His friend helped him digitize the notes, creating backups on encrypted drives, each labeled meticulously. It was exhausting, mentally and emotionally. The fear of discovery never left him. Every knock at the door, every unfamiliar car passing by his window, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his body. And yet, with each piece of evidence recorded, a strange sense of empowerment grew. Daniel realized that courage wasn't just about facing storms outside. It was also about confronting the storms within, confronting one's own fears and mistakes, and refusing to let them define him. A dangerous turn. One night, as Daniel returned from gathering supplies for their operation, he found his apartment ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered across the floor, and his digital backups gone. Panic surged. He knew they had been there for him, but anger followed closely behind. Someone had dared to invade his sanctuary, trying to erase the truth he had been safeguarding. He called his friend immediately. They've been here, everything, gone. Stay calm, the friend said. This is why we moved the most sensitive copies. You still have the encrypted drives. They'll come again, but we'll be ready. Daniel clenched his fists, teeth grinding. Fear remained, but determination now outweighed it. The fight was no longer optional, it was necessary. The turning point. Days later, a meeting was arranged with a journalist they trusted, someone known for exposing corruption without compromise. Daniel handed over the encrypted files, his heart pounding in his chest. The journalist's eyes widened as she reviewed the evidence. This is explosive, she whispered. If this gets out, heads will roll, people will be accountable. Daniel nodded, swallowing a lump of dread. I want the truth to come out. That's all I've ever wanted. You're brave, she said softly, and it's about time someone was. For the first time in weeks, Daniel allowed himself a small measure of relief. He wasn't alone. The story was no longer confined to his shoulders. It was alive, ready to be heard by the world. The first public revelation. A week later, the exposé went live. The headline struck the city like a thunderclap. Whistleblower reveals years of corruption in the heart of the company. Lives at stake. The impact was immediate. The office erupted in chaos. Authorities launched an investigation, and the higher-ups scrambled to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Daniel's friends and allies began receiving calls, emails, and messages from people thanking them, encouraging them, and sharing stories of similar abuses. Daniel, sitting quietly in his apartment, felt a strange sense of peace. The storm outside had subsided, replaced by the storm of accountability. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that truth had been set free, and with it, his own conscience. Reflection. In the quiet that followed the chaos, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. He remembered the storm, the night that had set all this in motion. The fear, the helplessness, the weight of responsibility. And he realized that courage wasn't a single act, nor was it heroic in a flashy way. It was the persistence to continue, to act despite fear, to uphold what was right when doing so was dangerous and lonely. He understood now that the storm hadn't just tested him, it had revealed him. It had shown him the strength he never knew he had, the capacity for moral clarity, and the depth of his empathy. Daniel's life would never be the same. But in embracing that change, in facing the consequences of his actions, and in standing for what was right, he had finally reclaimed his own story. Part 7. The Reckoning and Reconciliation. The city felt different in the aftermath of the exposé. The streets were the same, but the air was charged with a new energy, one of accountability, of quiet hope, and of change. People walked with heads held higher, speaking a little louder, challenging injustice when they saw it. For Daniel, the world had shifted in ways he could never have predicted. The fear that had once held him captive was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it no longer controlled him. Each step he took, each breath he drew, was infused with a sense of purpose. Reconnecting with the community. The first person Daniel sought out was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor whose home had suffered so much during the storm. He found her in the small community center, helping organize a relief effort. "Daniel," she said, her face lighting up with recognition and relief. "You came." "I did," he replied softly. "I wanted to help in any way I could." She took his hands in hers. "You've helped more than you know. That storm, it showed us who we truly are, and you—" She paused, eyes glistening. "You reminded us of courage." For the first time in decades, Daniel felt the full weight of gratitude directed at him, untainted by fear or suspicion. He realized that the impact of his actions rippled far beyond what he had imagined. Reconciliation with friends. Next, Daniel reached out to those closest to him, including old friends who had drifted away after years of unspoken tension. Eddie, the friend implicated in Mark's mysterious disappearance, was hesitant at first. "I don't know if I can forgive myself for what happened back then," Eddie admitted, eyes downcast. "I've carried that guilt every day." Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. "We all made mistakes, But hiding from them, letting them fester, that's what hurt the most. We can't change the past, Eddie, but we can shape the future. They sat in silence for a moment, the tension between them slowly unraveling. Then Eddie nodded. You're right. Let's do it right this time, together. Healing the wounds. The next few months were a journey of repair, not just of relationships, but of self. Daniel met with the families affected by the corruption he had exposed, offering support and listening to their stories. He volunteered at shelters, attended community meetings, and helped rebuild homes damaged by the storm. Every small act of service reminded him of the $5 he had once given to a stranger so many years ago. It was a reminder that even tiny gestures, when guided by intention and heart, could spark profound change. Facing the past. One evening, Daniel returned to the river where so much had begun, the river that had taken Mark's life and haunted him for decades. The water glimmered under the moonlight, calm now, almost forgiving. Anna was already there, standing at the edge with her arms crossed. She turned as he approached. You came, she said simply. I did, Daniel replied. I had to. They stood side by side, the silence between them heavy, yet filled with understanding. I wanted answers all these years, Anna admitted. I wanted to blame anyone, and you were the easiest target. Daniel swallowed, the old guilt surfacing for a moment. I never wanted him to die. I tried, I really did, and I've carried the weight of that day ever since. Anna's expression softened. I know, and maybe it's time we stop carrying it. Maybe it's time to let the river take the burden and leave us with the memory of love, of friendship, and the lessons we learned. They both looked out over the water, letting the wind carry away years of pain, fear, and blame. The transformation. From that day forward, Daniel's life shifted irrevocably. He continued his work exposing corruption and aiding his community, but he also embraced a personal philosophy of courage and empathy. He wrote down his own story, not for fame, but as a record of lessons learned, the small acts of bravery, the quiet choices, and the moments of grace that defined him. His relationship with his friends and family deepened. Bonds broken by fear and misunderstanding were repaired through honesty and shared purpose. And the town, which once regarded him with suspicion and whispers, began to see him as a living testament to resilience and integrity. The lesson. One evening, Daniel sat by the river, notebook in hand, watching the sunset reflect off the water. He thought about the stranger he had helped all those years ago, about the storm that had tested his courage, about the friends he had almost lost, and about the truths he had uncovered. He realized life was not about avoiding mistakes or never feeling fear. It was about how one responded to them, how one chose integrity over convenience, courage over comfort, empathy over indifference. A gentle breeze swept across the river, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and distant flowers. Daniel closed his eyes and smiled, finally feeling a sense of peace he had long believed impossible. The town remembered him, yes, but he had also remembered himself, the person he could be, the person he wanted to be. And that, he knew, was the true measure of a life well lived. Fade out. The camera would pull back, the river reflecting the orange and purple hues of the sunset. Children's laughter echoes faintly in the distance, a reminder that life continues, resilient and enduring. And Daniel, seated on the riverbank, remains a quiet figure of reflection, courage, and hope, a man forever changed, yet at peace with the past. This completes the emotional climax and resolution, showing reconciliation, personal growth, and the ultimate life lesson.